Fairy is a term that's an umbrella term that is often used to describe a particular range of spirit, but you can find spirits of that ilk all over the world. And the term fairy, originally, when it first entered the English language, referred actually to people who did magic, who were magical. If you have a sense of what a fairy might be, then that gives you clues as to how you might recognize them. If we open ourselves and open our sight to the near other world that is interpenetrating this one, to the other parts of this life, we're going to get the spirits that are closest to this first. And that's going to include the dead and the fair folk.
Hello, and welcome to the Pagan Portal Podcast, produced by Moonbooks Publishing and presented by me, Rachel Patterson. I am very pleased to welcome fellow author, storyteller extraordinaire, singer, witch, and any other manner of things. Halo Quin, welcome.
Hi, Rachel. It's nice to be on here with you.
We actually met in person for the first time last weekend, didn't we? Which was fabulous. Middle of a field.
It was really lovely.
Like you do.
And it's always nice when you finally meet in person after only ever seeing each other on a video, and you can work out what height you are in relation to each other. It's interesting.
And I can tell everyone that Halo's hair is amazing. Longest hair I have ever seen. It is absolutely amazing. And yes, she is taller than me, a lot taller than me, but then most people are, so... So we have lots to talk about today, mostly in the fairy realm, but we'll see where it takes us. Can you start off by telling everyone just a little bit about yourself?
So, as you said, long list of things that I do. And I used to say that it's because I got bored easily. And then I worked out that that wasn't the case. It's because I get excited easily and then follow the joy.
I like it.
Thank you. So that kind of sums me up. I get excited and I do stuff. So let me think. Some interesting snippets about me. I am actually officially a doctor. I'm a doctor of philosophy, not a medical doctor. So no, I don't want to see your rash. Thank you.
Let's not share that kind of stuff. No,
get that out of the way. But that makes it quite fun. So my storytelling I have started to do under the name Dr. Halo Quin, and I wander around with a big doctor's bag full of medicinal yarns that people sort of choose at random. And I really enjoy doing this because it's almost like doing a divination for people, but without it being all kind of formally magical. And you get this opportunity to sort of touch base and connect with people on that energetic level, on that magical level, without putting everyone off with being explicit about it. And what it's really sort of brought home to me is the way in which so much of our interactions as human beings, so many of them are on that kind of magical, energetic level where we're connecting in, we're being more than just what is immediately apparent. And that comes through for me in the stories. And so much of my magical work is also rooted in stories and storytelling. So the use of language, the use of the voice, and the clues that we find in the folklore, in the myths, in the legend, in our interactions with those beings as they present through there, and then taking that from the page or from the voice out into the world. I live in Wales. I live on the west coast of Wales in Cardigan Bay, where the land of Cantre'r Gwaelod is, which is known as the Welsh Atlantis by some people. So I really love that there's the mythology is woven through the landscape. And I have always loved fairies and magic. It's been a long lifetime passion for me.
That you described, I looked at your website, which is wonderful. And you do describe yourself as a storyteller, which I know you as. You are amazing at telling stories, and I am in awe of that talent. But you also give yourself the label as a witch. Is that your main pathway, or is that just part of it?
Witch is a tricky term, isn't it?
Mm. Yeah.
And I came to paganism, to magic, when I was about 10. And at that point, back in the 90s, most of the material was sort of neo-Wiccan stuff that was being published and used the term witch. And so I found this and I went, that's me. I was suddenly home. And over my teens, I found Reclaiming Witchcraft, in particular that tradition, and Anderson Fairy Witchcraft. And those traditions all use the term witch. And so it has always resonated deeply for me. But then when I look into the history of it and I explore those other sides of it, I'm like, okay, it's got a really complex piece, because historically it wouldn't have been the word we used. Historically, we wouldn't have identified with that. This is a relatively recent thing. But today it feels here specifically, it feels so vibrant and so powerful. And so I really wrestled with that for a few years until I came to the conclusion that even in today's world, in our culture, in where we are, like you and I, we're in Britain, we're engaging with a lot of people. And if you tell people, or if they find out that you believe in magic, that you talk to spirits, that you do spell work, that you dance with dragons, like all of these things, yeah, they look at you like you're bonkers. Many of them.
I am familiar with that look.
And it's that thing of like, it doesn't matter how positive the connotations are for me. You tell people you do those things, whatever label you give it, and they're like, oh, not sure about that. You're a bit weird. And so I thought, well, what's wrong then with taking that term witch and going, okay, it's going to get that response. It's going to get that response. And historically, that's true. And it reminds me that what we do is on the edges. It's on the fringes. It's not socially acceptable. Even when we're doing everything for healing and positive things and for the good of all beings, like our society is like, that's still a bit weird, isn't it? You probably shouldn't be doing that. And so like that, it resonates with me from my personal journey. It resonates with me from my traditions, and it resonates with me as a reminder that what we do is often in the equivalent of under the cover of darkness, under the light of the moon, in the shadows of the trees, when it comes to the wider society. That's why I like sneaking it in through my storytelling.
But we always were, weren't we? The weird folk always were the ones that lived on the edge of the town or the village and lived in the forest, the liminal spaces. Which is, let's own it. Let's own the edges. So,
also, there's power in words as well.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, and so to have that response, like if I say to someone, oh, I'm a storyteller, they know what that means. If I say, oh, I'm a druid, because I'm a member of Oakwald, so technically I can claim that title, sure. I'm a druid. They go, oh, okay, yeah, so you wear tea towels on your heads and walk them down hills in London. For the ice says, whatever. If I say I'm a witch, then they start asking questions. And then I get the opportunity to share and say, well, here is a little bit. If you want to know more, ask.
It's funny, isn't it? The different reaction between those two words, druid and witch. Lots of similarities as we know it, but from the outside, there are two usually very different reactions. So 10, when you first realised the witchcraft.
About that, yeah.
How did you find your way to where you are now?
What, from there?
Yeah. Short version, obviously. You know.
Yeah, short version.
I know what it's like asking a storyteller to tell a story.
Yeah, when you told me this is only going to be sort of 45 minutes to an hour, and I'm like, are you sure? So the short version is that when I was about 10, one of my friends was messing around with Ouija boards and ghosts and got really freaked out. And she told me, and I went to the library because books are magic.
Oh,
frankly, yeah. And in the library, I found a book called The Psychic Explorer, which had all sorts of interesting things, including the version I found. And it took me about a decade and a half to find it again after that copy in the library. It had ceremonial magic rituals in the back. There was also a little book on witches. There were a couple of books on ghosts, like right next to the big Bible. And so I started there and then just read everything I could find. And I was lucky enough or unlucky enough to grow up in Swindon. Swindon's not my favourite place. I feel like I should have some loyalty to it because it raised me, but...
We all have connections or non-connections for personal reasons, don't we?
Yeah, we do. And it was near to Avebury.
Of course.
Right? So I could, in my teens, hop on a bus and 25 minutes later be in, like, what is it, the largest stone circle in Britain, one of the largest in Europe, if not the largest. And every festival, pagans of various stripes would gather. So I started going down there and meeting different people, and I got really put off by the ones that just wanted to go to the pub and really intrigued by the ones that actually wanted to talk about magic. But even before all of that, even before I found out that it was a thing, when I was tiny, I would always go looking for fairies. I'd go looking for the spirits in the hedges, in the woodlands, and I knew they were there. I got really frustrated that I couldn't see them, but I knew that they were there. So I was always looking for them, and I still have my first fairy wand that I was given when I was about 6. Do you want to see it? It glows in the dark.
For those who are listening and not watching, it's a yellow star. It's beautiful.
It is. It's a yellow plastic star on a plastic stick, and it was a Tinkerbell wand, and it glows in the dark. And I still have it, and I don't really use it in ritual, but I'm starting to think maybe I should.
Oh, I think glow-in-the-dark one's got to be incredibly practical in ritual. We should all have them.
So when I found out that there were adults, that there were people who were actually engaging with magic, and I came across R.J. Stewart's work and what have you, I was like, suddenly, at that point where most people are kind of letting go of those things and going, oh, okay, there isn't a place for this in the world, I realised that actually there was. And that meant that I continued following that, seeking fairies. I came across Anderson Fairy Witchcraft, looking for the fair folk, and through that found Reclaiming, and then 2 days after my 18th birthday went to a Reclaiming witch camp which featured the story of Ceridwen and Taliesin, and that has sort of sent me to Wales, and I followed the stories and the magic and listened to people, and yeah, that's kind of how I've ended up here.
I think glow in the dark ones. I think we've got a niche in the market there. We might have to follow on.
I know some people make beautiful ones that are like wooden with crystals and have wires and things wrapped around them. Maybe they could just add some glow-in-the-dark beads to them.
Yes, I think it's a must. Yeah, definitely. Let's start a trend. So talking of fairies, now a couple of your books are on fairies, and I'd like to start with the one that is Folk Tales, Fairies and Spirits. The strap line I love on this one, fairy magic from story to practice. And I love the idea of that. How did that first book come about?
That's actually one of my more recent ones. And
yes. We're going back to front, aren't we?
Yeah, we are. And as someone who's always been fascinated by stories, I've always been a talkative person. And I used to make stories up and things. So when I kind of started to find my way into magic, the people who mentioned things like R.J. Stewart, about the way that the keys to magic, the keys to relationship with spirits, and the keys to understanding some of the the magical traditions and the magical, there's a particular word and I've lost it somewhere, but that the keys to the magic is often embedded in the symbols and the rhythms of the stories. And so I have spent many years exploring specific stories and general stories, and particularly I'm always fascinated by ones with the fair folk in them and the Fairy Queen. So the Scottish border ballads of Thomas the Rhymer and Tam Lin hold some really fascinating pieces, because when we start to listen and look at these tales as holding initiatory patterns, as holding guidance, then you can actually listen to, it's not the right word, you can draw out the pathway through the rhythms of those tales, through the journeys that the characters go on, through the symbols that are there. And one of the things that I'm very, very keen on, and this is why I teach, is not giving people like, this is how to do it, but rather showing and highlighting how to find instructions, how to find keys yourself. And for me, one of the big ways of doing that is through stories. I know other people do it with archaeology and with historical sources, but for me, the stories have been passed down, and the ones that continue, the ones that still grab us, are the ones that hold those pieces of magic, those nuggets. So with that book, what I wanted to do with Folktales, Fairies and Spirits, what I wanted to do was to illustrate how you can approach stories, not just the stories that I share with you, but the stories that you find in your own landscape, how to actually explore those and pull out the threads. So in there, I've got various like bits of information like, oh, this is offerings that they might like, or these are taboos that you might want to follow, and rules and what have you, and different ways of engaging that. But I've tried to show the workings out, show the process, so that other people can do that themselves with their local stories, because fairies aren't just, well, fairy is a term that's an umbrella term that is often used to describe a particular range of spirits. But you can find spirits of that ilk all over the world under different names with differences. And by exploring the stories of your landscape, wherever it is you are, you can get to know the spirits that are there, the fairy type spirits that are there, rather than following the rules that are specific to Ireland or specific to Wales.
Now, you mentioned fairies and spirits. Is there a difference? Are they separate things, or just two words to describe the same?
What I find, or what I have found is, and this is probably illustrated beautifully by my plastic wand and the children's fairy wings that came with it at the time, that when you say fairy, people often think of like the children's images or the flower fairies or like Tinkerbell and things like that. They think of the kind of diminutive post-Victorian concept. We're starting to kind of broaden that out a bit more, but it evokes a particular thing. Now, for me, the term encompasses a broader range of spirits. It's the folkloric spirits, the elves as well, and all the different sizes, if you like. But they come underneath the umbrella of spirits. So all the fairies are spirits, but not all the spirits are fairies.
Clear as mud. Yep. That kind of sums up the fairy world, I think, doesn't it?
It does. So one of the ways, and I'll try and keep this brief, but I've wrestled for many years with, as a philosopher, like, how do we categorize what is a fairy? How do we categorize that? And I came to the conclusion personally that this is a bracket of type of spirits. This is sort of a family of spirits, if you like, an extended family of spirits that energetically sit very close to the physical world. And so if humans are the energies, we live in the energies that are like physical and emotional, mental and spiritual, say, broadly speaking, then fairies kind of overlap, they brush up against the physical and then overlap up to the emotional, mental, spiritual, and whatever's next on that. Whereas something like an angel, you might encounter, and this is just as an example, other people have different definitions, would occupy a different range in the spectrum. So most of those would be sort of more the information layers and things like that. A god is bigger and covers more of them. So that it's kind of this spectrum. And the fairy folk are these spirits that are very, very close to the manifest world. Very, very close. And sometimes they slip over into it, which is where we get, some of the human fairy interaction stories that we get.
Now, you mentioned the Fairy Queen a minute ago, and she does appear in your books. When you say you call her the Fairy Queen, do you mean one Fairy Queen, or do you use that just as a title for lots of different Fairy Queens?
Again, clear as mud. So for me,
I don't work with the fairy world, so this is all fascinating to me. So I am hopefully asking the questions that everyone's thinking of.
Or possibly ones that, because no one's actually asked me that before.
Yay!
So,
I'm just being awkward.
Good. And again, I'm coming back to based in my experiences and what have you. There are individual spirits that are fairy queens. Okay. And if you know Morgan Diamond's work, and I know you do, then you'll know that there are specific Irish fairy queens listed in their work. When I'm talking about the fairy queen, I'm kind of talking about not an archetype, but the power, the being that is the power behind that. So the consciousness that is behind that. So I don't really hold to all goddesses are one goddess, all gods are one god, or all lover goddesses are one lover goddess, or whatever. I don't they're not all the same being, just with different faces. But there is a power and energy, almost like the throne or the crown that is worn by all these different deities of a type. There is the crown of goddess that every goddess wears, and somehow we recognize it. And so when I talk about the fairy queen, I'm almost talking about that, the consciousness that is in the power, that's the crown, the throne, the cloak of the fairy queen. So it's sort of a step bigger than an individual. And for me, when she turns up, she kind of solidifies into an individual that isn't specific to one of the named in the stories.
That makes sense.
Oh, I'm glad.
Now, one thing that does appear in the book, and you have a chapter titled The Hawthorne Tree. I know the Hawthorne Tree as a fairy tree, but why is it a fairy tree? Is it just that specific tree that's associated with fairies?
Lots of trees are associated with fairies. The hawthorn in modern and quite a lot of the folklore is considered to be to have a particularly powerful connection. The hawthorn tree, if you don't know it, it is, as the name would suggest, it has thorns, and it's often a hedgerow tree. So hawthorn makes a wonderful hedge. It's it's quite dense, it's shrubby, it's got the thorns, it's got quite thick foliage and leaves. Not only that, the leaves themselves are edible, the young leaves are edible. So for travellers walking, it was they earned the name bread and cheese, travellers' bread and cheese, because it would sort of support you on that journey. So they've got that association with both boundaries and edges and travelling. Now, what's quite fun then, and of course the blossoms, they flower around Beltane, around the point where we're starting to go outside, really outside into the land, and shift from our inside life to our outside life, or at least traditionally we would have been. Many of us still stay indoors on the computer, like I suppose we are now.
Modern world.
Yeah. But so it's marking that time when you then start to have more interactions with the spirits of the nature and the outside world, which is where we associate fairies. But you also get, as well as being that boundary, as well as having the thorns that hold that space, the blossoms that mark the changing, the supporting of a journey, you'll also often find a single hawthorn tree in the middle of a field where the sheep have nibbled down all the others and just left one. And it's strange. You encounter it and you're like, why did they leave that one?
Just that one.
Yeah, just that one. And I'm like, well, it probably managed to get, thinking skeptically, it got tall enough that they went, oh, that's probably not tasty anymore. And then they let it grow and they're like, oh, look, now we've got shelter. But it does then carry that sort of sense of being blessed by the spirits. And the spirits of those sort of untamed places are the spirits that are fairy.
Would it mark the entry to the fairy world?
I think it can. You go and sit under a lone hawthorn tree if you can get under the branches. Not always easy. And spend some time with it. Then that opens up a space. You can go start a journey there. Or you can walk alongside the hedgerow and connect in with the hawthorn and go, we're going on a journey together. One of the other things that's quite interesting about hawthorn is that I mentioned in my book is that in herbalism, medicinally, it is a heart balancing medicine. Now, I'm not a herbalist, so please don't go and take this as medical advice, doctor, but not that kind of doctor. It's a heart balancing medicine. So it's said to, if you have high blood pressure, it lowers it. But if you have low blood pressure, it raises it. And our hearts, we can talk about it on an emotional level and what have you. But our hearts are this huge muscle with quite a strong electromagnetic field. They've got a strong energy to them. And we do relate, we connect with each other through them. So when we meet a spirit, particularly one that is so close to our realm, like the fair folk are, we can communicate with them through there. So if we encounter a hawthorn, and that helps us to soften and to open up that space and to feel safe opening up that space, then that means we're more likely to be able to encounter the beings that are moving in that area. Because I don't actually think of the other world as being somewhere else.
Okay.
Yeah, the other world is here. We're just, our attention is in one space or the other.
Right. I work with hedge riding, so the hedge for me is a boundary. It is a boundary, a liminal space between this world and the other world. So the hawthorn fits into that very nicely. I'm going to jump actually, because you mentioned the heart, and in your other fairy book, Fairy Magic, you mentioned the heart box, which I love the idea of. Can we jump into that?
Your Fairy Magic, I wrote the as a different, it was originally Your Fairy Heart, that I wrote so long ago now. And then that became Your Fairy Magic, which Moonbooks published as my first book with them. And I look back at it now and I'm like, this is such a sweet book. It's such a gentle, come and be in this kind of loving space where we kind of start to encounter that deep truth of that magic. So there's something that I want to talk about, and the reason I talk about the fairy heart a lot within that book, and I've stopped using that terminology so much now because people get they get distracted by it. But the reason I focused on that was that if the fair folk, if the fairies are that energy, that those spirits that are so close to being physical, they're part of the wild magic, the untamed magic of nature. They're that liminal space that is just outside of being structured. Well, at our heart, we are also animals. We're also part of nature. So if we strip away some of the conditioning, if we ease away some of the masks that we put on in order to get through a life with lots of expectations, then we start to sort of tune into that, where that untamed magic is within us. And if we focus on that in kind of a loving way, because of course we are still within the world, we are still, it's really important for us as humans to be relating to other humans. This is part of what being human is, part of what being people, we're people together. So, this has got to be tempered. This is not talking about going wild in the kind of, violent sort of way. This is more wild like dandelions. Yeah. Wild like a summer rain than a thunderstorm. So when we tap into that, I was like, well, what do we find at that point? We find that point where the fairy magic flows through us. And the term fairy, originally, when it first entered the English language, referred actually to people who did magic, who were magical. Yeah, so we've got this overlap here. So the fairy box is an exercise that I kind of devised, inspired by crane bags in Irish mythology and the practice of altars, of having a physical space that holds objects that represent and that hold magic for us. And so I devised it as this exercise that you can do to create kind of a magical object just for you, which as a box you can close and keep safe and secret from other people. But you can explore your what is in your heart, where that wild, untamed magic is in you, what you're thinking about, what you're feeling about, and where that magic runs through outside of the watchful eye of society. So that you can sort of actually start to get to grips with the core of yourself. And from there, well, isn't it one of those magical truths that we need to know ourselves, know thyself? Once you know yourself, then from there you can start to actually practice, you can start to actually move out in the world and come back to your core, and you know where home is. So yeah, that's where that came from.
But it's
also I like boxes.
Boxes are cool. You never know what's in them, or they can hide secrets or mysteries. Yes, definitely. That was interesting to me, because when I think about fairy witchcraft, fairy magic, I don't necessarily think of it as helping us on our own inner journeys, but that's exactly what you're describing.
And I think it works both ways, honestly. So when this is one of the reasons I feel it's important, is because we have forgotten a lot of the wisdom of being with non-human nature. We've forgotten a lot of that way of relating that is respectful and connected and not entitled. We tend towards entitlement. We're taught to do that, and it is to a degree rooted in a survival thing. It's like it's instinctive. We take because we need. And up until recently, and still in some parts of the world, like you couldn't do that. You had to do it in moderation. You had to do it in relationship. And the stories of the fair folk reflect that. They reflect that way of relating with them. And I say we, like you and I, our culture, like we've forgotten what it means to relate to the tree as a spirit, what it means to relate to the nature as being alive and filled with beings that are equal or greater in wisdom and strength than us. We've forgotten. So this work with the fairy folk is rooted in relationship. That's where the foundation is. And so, yes, it absolutely should be of benefit to those spirits as well as to us as spirits. And all good relationships are reciprocal. And in order to be in good relationship, we have to work on ourselves. We've got to know who we are in order to we can start without that. We can start on with good intentions and doing our best. And as time goes on, we can learn to do better. And we can learn better who we are and how we can help and how we can be helped. And there is this key piece for me that if we heal ourselves and we invite healing in, we work on being better in ourselves as well, then we share that with the world. And so we make the world a better place from the inside out. And so we can do it both directions.
And it needs it. Definitely. We need to bring that back. Definitely. Let's encourage more of that. Now, the question I do get asked occasionally is, how would you recognise a fairy or one of the fair folk? Are there a key set of, like a tick box, this is what a fairy looks like? How do we recognise one?
And I love that. I love that question. So, to people who ask that, I put it to them well, what do you think a fairy is? So if you have a sense of what a fairy might be, then that gives you clues as to how you might recognise them. And the common thread throughout folklore is that they are similar to us, but different. So that, similar to us as humans and similar to the other animals as well, like the other physical animals that we know, but different. There's a difference there. You can't always put your finger on it. So you'll find in the stories that some of the fairy spirits have a hollow back or a tail or something, and you might spot it out of the corner of your eyes. And I think this is where part of where the idea of pointy ears come from. It's a really subtle difference that might make you look twice and you may not notice it. Pointy ears are I think a relatively modern thing rather than actually a historical thing. But I think it's that similar sort of idea. I will wear pointy ears when I'm out as a storyteller. And I find it absolutely hilarious catching people sort of walking past and then doing the double take. It's beautiful. It's beautiful. And it gives people that moment of, oh, there's something strange going on here, which wakes them up. So as a human doing that. But this like us, but different, familiar, but is kind of the key. That's the key piece. And so if you meet a being that, and a lot of the stories of modern day fairy encounters have people saying, well, I was walking out in an isolated place. I was in the middle of nowhere. I could see for miles around, and all of a sudden someone appeared. This old man in a Hawaiian shirt, turned up and walked with me and talked to me about, I don't know, airplanes and drones. And then we stopped and he said something really profound. And I kind of looked away for a moment, and when I looked back, he was gone. You describe the way the guy looked, or the being you encountered looked, and they sound like a human being. There's nothing obvious, but there's something strange about the encounter.
A knowing, a feeling, maybe, rather than a seeing, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And so this is where it helps to be open, to be aware, to be non-judgmental, and to just sort of trust yourself and your intuition. So this is one of the reasons it's really important to build up your kind of intuitive responses and things, is because you know when something is strange, and you know when something is good or when something is potentially trouble. And that gives you that indication of which direction to head in, whether you cut the interaction short or whether you hang out for a while.
Yeah, I think we underestimate our intuition quite a lot. It is a skill to be relied on, for sure.
Yeah. There is a really challenging piece to this as well, though. So for anyone that knows my work, they've probably encountered the fact that I have ADHD, and I'm quite open about that. And they think I've probably got autism as well. But so I come under the banner of neurodivergent, and I'm reasonably good at sort of passing for neurotypical on a superficial level. Like most people go, oh, like, I wouldn't have thought that you were ADHD or autistic. They're like, oh, I wouldn't have thought that about you. But growing up, all of my peers knew that I was different. They didn't know why, but they knew that I was different. There was something different. And it's been shown throughout like various bits of research that we respond, we recognize when someone is neurodivergent. So their brains diverge enough from the typical that they will fit a category of autistic, ADHD, dyslexic, whatever. Like there's a particular wiring or set of wirings that fit in this category. They come with great strengths, great benefits. They can also come along with great challenges. But there is then a prejudice against people who are different. Yeah, so there is this challenge there that the like us but different, the uncanny valley, they might be a changeling, historically led to some horrendous situations. And in the modern day, in our world, leads to like discrimination and things like that. So there is a piece to be aware of there. But this is also why so many people who are neurodivergent will use descriptions metaphorically of themselves as aliens or changelings. And I know that for some people this is this seems insensitive. But for some of us, like myself, I've used the term changeling for myself. It describes how I felt coming through the world. And when I learned about some of the history behind it, I'm like, well, I'm actually kind of using that or claiming that as a way of honoring, or not honoring maybe, but remembering that other people had it much harder than I did historically. The same as the term witch. I can use the term witch now and not get stoned in the streets here. But elsewhere in the world, I can't. I can use the term changeling and use it metaphorically, poetically, and to describe that connection that I do have with the fairy realm and the fairy folk and the other world, the spirits.
Basically, we don't learn, do we, as humans? We don't learn from our mistakes.
It's hard. A lot of these things are based in survival. We are herd creatures, we're pack animals, we're community-based. And so anything that is different is a threat to the survival. Yeah. Or can be, but it can also be a great strength. And so this is why you have some of us that are on the outskirts. We live on the edges. We live in the liminal spaces. We are the ones that are into magic. We are the ones that are neurodivergent. We are the ones that are queer or disabled or other in some way. And what is other will be different in different communities and different spaces.
Yeah.
And I think it bears remembering that.
Yeah, that's a good way of looking at it all from a different perspective that perhaps a lot of people hadn't thought of from that point of view. Yeah, fascinating. And to bring in something else that's other, in your book, you do mention a connection between the fairy folk and the dead, which is one that I was surprised to come across.
This is quite common in folklore, in the stories, where someone who travels to the fairy realm will see people who have died or meet someone that's their ancestor. And often the humans, the human ancestors will help them to escape or will give them advice or whatever. So actually these spaces of like this other world. And this has fed into my theory about like fairies being that family of spirits that are very, very close to us. They're very, very close to the manifest world, to the physical realm, because like when we die and we sort of leave behind that physical bit, we can end up in their spaces. This is also really interesting if you look at the Norse mythology, the Alvar, where we get the name elves from, yes, the same cognate root, they were the male ancestors as well as the elves.
Okay.
Just
connection.
like the Disir, things that connect, just like the Disir we're kind of the female, feminine ancestors and guardian protective spirits. To me, these are sort of very similar categories. Like they fit in that family.
Yeah.
So there's that thing that the dead and the fair folk end up occupying a similar space. And yeah, it's, if we open ourselves and open our sight to the near other world that is interpenetrating this one, to the other parts of this life, we're going to get the spirits that are closest to this first. And that's going to include the dead and the fair folk.
I was genuinely surprised to see that connection, but it all falls into place. It does make sense. Thinking of anyone that wants to make that, starting that journey into the fairy world to work with fair folk, are there any things that they should or shouldn't do to start their journey?
Approach with respect. Yeah. And an attitude of not being entitled. That's kind of the foundation of it. The next piece of that ties in with it is to consider that the spirits of the other world, the fair folk, they cover a wide range of types of beings with different personalities, different wants, different needs, different ways of communicating, different interactions. So very much like if you go swimming in the ocean, if you don't know how to swim, then you just paddle in the shallow end. If you go deeper into the water and you can swim and you encounter fish, you're probably all right. But if you start to see a fin, well, that shark isn't evil. It just might be hungry. The jellyfish you would probably avoid, but the seagulls, if you're not taking chips out on the waves with you, you're probably okay.
If you've got chips, then you're done for.
Yeah. I live by the sea, so
yes,
where I'm coming with this. So that's the key, is sort of approach without expectations. And my recommendation would be to go out somewhere where you can be outside. Outside is key. Somewhere that is green is easier. So if there's like trees and plants and things like that, or the equivalent of green for your landscape, and just spend some time being. I have always had really good responses to if I read aloud poems about fairies.
All right. Okay. To the fairies.
To the fairies. So you read the poems, or you sing a song, or you tell a story to the fairies. And pick ones that sort of indicate that hold the kind of relationship that you would like with them, the way that you'd like them to turn up. But just do it as an offering, as a I thought you might like this. You can also make physical offerings. If you're going to do that, make sure that they are good for the land that you're in, biodegradable. And check out your local stories, like the stories of your landscape, because your landscape is going to be different to my landscape. And so the land and the spirits there will need different things and require different ways of approaching. But that foundation of respect, of not being entitled, and of just saying that, here I am, here's something I thought you would like, and listening.
I'm glad you mentioned that as an offering, because quite often I think people think the word offering means they have to physically give food, drink, crystals, flowers, whatever it might be. But offering, particularly for yourself as a storyteller, offering can often be just verbal, can't it?
If you're offering up your time, if you're speaking, you're offering up your breath, you're offering up a sharing of something that you've made an effort to find, to learn, to create. All of those things are valuable. And when we speak, we are putting vibrations out into the world. We are putting energy out into the world. And so by offering that up, we're like when we meet a friend or a person for the first time, we say, hi, how are you? Tell me about yourself. This is a bit about me, or here's something interesting that maybe we can find some common ground with. It's making that space, and it doesn't leave anything toxic in the landscape that can poison something. It doesn't litter. It doesn't, there's none of that going on. You're just sharing from the heart, sharing something that matters to you. It goes a long way.
Yeah, I think it's a brilliant idea. And I connect with the spirit of the land wherever I am. That's really important to me. Are there different types of fairies depending on where you are? You yourself being in Wales, are there specific fairies for Wales that live in Wales compared to, I'm in Hampshire in England, so would we have different fairies?
So one of the things that I've noticed is that there's slightly different, like you'll find difference in the nature of the people in different parts of the country. There's differences in the nature of the fair folk, of the spirits in the different landscapes. And it's something that I thought was really fascinating about the Scottish border ballads, being a bit like, so you've got the Tale of Tamlin, it's a little bit wilder up there, compared to, if you want to, this is slightly controversial perhaps, but think about Rhiannon as being a fairy queen, as a fairy being that came across from the other worlds, was like us but different, brought wisdom, magic, etc. The difference between those two beings, to me, kind of indicates a little bit about the difference in those landscapes, because that's where they've come up from, that's where the people around have come up from. And I think just like we do, they are shaped by their environment and they reflect it. And we'll move until we find somewhere that feels like home.
Do you think, I'm thinking about nature, I live by the sea as well, but I'm also on the edge of a city. Am I going to find city fairies? I've got an image in my head now of fairies with, Chanel shopping bags.
yeah, I absolutely have. I really enjoy just rock concerts, and like the music spaces, because actually there's a lot of energy there. There's a lot of people. There's a lot of it's really busy, so it's hard to tune into it. But you get into kind of this ecstatic space when you're dancing in that sort of space, and you get kind of into that ecstatic vibe. And that can, if you turn your attention to it, to that level of the spirit realm, you start to find spirits there. You start to find fair folk. And what I've noticed is they tend to, the ones I've encountered in those spaces have tended to be entirely uninterested in interacting. They're there doing their thing. We're there doing our thing. We're just sharing space. But they're there. They're there.
I love it. Heavy metal fairies. Brilliant.
Yeah. I first noticed this at a Gary Newman concert of all things.
Oh, well, an 80s fairy. I'm on board totally. Yeah. Excellent. I'm sure we could talk about fairies for ages, and we are going to absolutely run out of time to talk about all the things I wanted to. So if I just finish up with, have you got some new projects you're working on? Because I know you're working in a slightly different field at the moment with your doctor title on a very exciting project. Would you like to share?
Now I'm trying to think which one of my projects you're thinking of.
You gave me a business card for it at the weekend.
Oh, I see. Yes. Yes. So,
you don't have to share if you don't want to.
Yeah. No, absolutely. So, I'm working on a couple of different things. Obviously, my most recent book to come out was Crimson Craft, which is Sexual Magic for the Solo Witch, which we've not gone into.
That's a whole other program on its own, I think, that one. We'll put that one in.
It really is. Yeah. But it's very much, again, about that heart-centered space. And so I've been doing a lot of work with that, and I'm just opening up. I've been working on my kind of school, as it were, of the Enchanted Academy. So I'm just restructuring things, and I'm going to have space for the all of those pieces, all the Crimson Craft stuff, but also the bardic things. So my next book coming out is Storytelling for Magic. So actually using storytelling skills in magic, again, that's a whole other program. And then the fairy stuff as well. So I'm setting up a community currently that is holding all of these different pieces. So if people want to come and explore and discuss my particular routes into fairy, that would be a brilliant place to do so. Come and get on my mailing list and you'll find out when the doors open. And over the last 5 years, I've been working with a ceremonial angel botherer called Seth Salem. So we work in from 2 different directions, really. He's coming from sort of a very structured thing, which I have some background in. And I'm coming from the kind of more ecstatic, intuitive, witchy, druidy space. And together, like, he made a structure and then asked me to come and help fill in some of the gaps of something called Star Club. So that's the project that happens. We run courses down in Bristol. We're just coming to the end of cycle 4. And it's this container of operational magic. So it's orientated towards, you come in, we all agree on like what our goals are for the cycle as a group goal, and we distill it all down into something that works for everyone. And then within this sort of slightly more ceremonial framework, we run rituals and explore. So we do a bit of teaching and then a ritual on different styles and different directions of approaching magic, all to the same end. So we do divination, we do visual magic with sigils and bind runes and things. We do journeying practices. We work with some natural magic, and I send them all out to hug trees. And the ceremonial magicians go, "What are we doing?" And the witchy folk go, "Yeah, we do this all the time." And it's really, what I love about it is seeing this point where, and I had it for myself with the things that were slightly less familiar for me, but we see it with everyone find something that is familiar to them and something that is not familiar. And where we find that bit where those things overlap, where they match up, where the similarities are and where the difference in perspective are, where that gives rise to new understandings and new ways of engaging with magic. It's this phenomenally fun process of really exploring what is possible and the different technologies and different ways of doing magic. The transformations in people that have been through it, in their confidence, in their lives, has just been an absolute honour to witness. So that's Star Club. We run the cycles down in Bristol. We'll be starting a new cycle in the spring. We have open rituals there that people can come along to. We're also, like, Seth and I are also happy to travel. So if someone's got a group somewhere in the UK or further abroad, if you want to pay our flights, we'll come out and run a cycle for you there. So that's good fun. So yeah, if you want operational, syncretic, magical technology, there's Star Club. And if you want to come and dive into fairies and bardic magic and the Crimson Craft, then there's the Enchanted Academy.
Fabulous. Spoilt for choice.
Like I say, I get excited.
I think it's an excellent way of looking at it. I had always thought it was because I had a short span of attention. Now I know that I'm wrong.
You're just excitable, and that's
absolutely,
good.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Halo. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. I've learned so much today, and hopefully others have as well. If you are interested, do look up Halo on the internet. Thank you very much for joining us. And thank you to our listeners and our viewers, and we will see you again next time on the Pagan Portal Podcast.
You have been listening to the Pagan Portal Podcast, a Moonbooks Publishing production. For more information, please visit our website.